19th century, the rivers and lakes of the region served as the interstate highways of the time. Whoever controlled the waterways controlled the surrounding territory. Lake Champlain served as a key link in the network of rivers and lakes connecting Quebec City to the north with New York City to the south. Let's head over to the firing of the 1775 American Revolutionary muskets.
The Royal Artillery carried a slightly different weapon. They carried the Royal Artillery carbine. Now, this musket was basically the same thing, but it was a lot shorter and a lot lighter, meaning that this soldier could easily sling that weapon across its back with that white leather sling there, so he could operate a cannon with that musket on his back. But whether it's the artillery carbine or the long-land musket here, they all have the same parts, because they're both flintlock muskets. Now the barrel here is this 46-inch long tapered iron bore. Now this is going to be attached to an English walnut stock here by a series of pins, which also hold in place brass loops on the bottom of our gun. These brass loops hold in the ramrod. This iron or steel ramrod is what we're going to use to throw down our musket ball, our gunpowder, and our wadding into the bore of our gun. But all the main working parts of this musket are on the back, at the lock. And the lock has a couple key parts. The first part here is the cock of the gun. This is a vise that in its jaws holds flint. Can anyone tell me what flint is? It's a rock, exactly. Now, we've sharpened that flint to a razor sharp edge, and it's held in check by a strong spring on the inside of the gun, held in check by the trigger. When I pull that trigger, the cock will go flying forward. And just in front of that, we have the hammer. This L-shaped piece of iron has a face of steel welded onto it. I'm sure you can imagine what's coming next. What happens when flint strikes steel at high speeds? Sparks, absolutely. So when we close that hammer, bringing the musket to full cock, and we pull the trigger, the cock will go flying forward, scraping that flint against the steel, sending down a shower of sparks, priming charge of gunpowder. Now, those sparks will ignite that gunpowder, creating an explosion, and it will send that explosion through a small hole drilled into the barrel, called the vent, touch hole. That will serve to convey that explosion into the barrel, igniting our main powder charge inside and sending our bullet out towards the enemy. Now, in case the enemy gets a little closer though, we can always affix that bayonet on our waist belt onto our muskets, turning them into short spears. Very effective for enforcing social distancing. Now, these paper cartridges are the forerunner of the modern brass cartridge, and it holds everything I need to load and fire this musket inside of this little paper tube. At the bottom of the tube is a bullet fit to the size of my barrel here. On top of that is a charge of gunpowder, enough to act as the priming charge as well as the main charge. And that paper tube is not just a really neat, nifty, handy-dandy carrying case, but it's also going to act as the wadding to hold everything tightly into the bore of my gun. This is what's called a file. Right next to them would be another file and another file after that, and so on until you had a wall of soldiers, hundreds of men strong, 3 ranks deep. But in these tight formations, these soldiers are about half an arm's distance between each other, and the way that we load and fire these muskets is really important so we stay safe. And this 1764 manual exercise would teach these soldiers a step-by-step procedure to load these muskets safely and effectively. They would wait for a series of commands which started with Bonjour, Hala! 1, 2. Now, we all bring our weapons in front of our face. You may also hear us counting off 1, 2. That's to make sure we're all doing these motions at the same time. We all throw our muskets down, grabbing a cartridge from our pouch and tearing it open with our teeth. We pour a small priming charge of gunpowder into our pan, clasping it shut with 3 fingers.
Shut your head.
1, 2. We all cast a weapon spout, holding that cartridge down by the barrel. We're now ready to
Charge it. Charge it.
we pour the rest of the contents of that cartridge down the barrel, including that little paper tube, and we just break our ramrods free.
Withdraw your ready.
1, 2. Using a couple firm thrusts, we're going to throw that iron ramrod down to the bore of our gun, using the weight of it to pack everything tightly into the bore.
Turn your ready.
1, 2. Now we're ready to fire.
Show your fire up.
1, 2. And just like loading, to fire these guns, we follow a specific set of commands to do this safely and effectively.
Ready.
Now, you'll notice a couple things happen here. First, we all bring our weapons to full cock, meaning that these guns are ready to go off. The men in the front rank take a knee. The men in the middle rank take a slight step over for stability. The men in the furthest rear rank, they take 2 steps over so they can fire in between files.
Reset.
Now, don't let Hollywood fool you. We are aiming at specific targets downrange, and we can hold this position quietly and patiently until the command is given to
Ready. Reset. Half cock your fire up.
The entrance to 4th Ticonderoga.
This is the guard room. And the guard room, essentially, you have maybe 10 soldiers on guard duty at night. 5 of them would be sleeping in this bed, and then the other 5 would be on guard duty. And then halfway through the night, they'd switch. And so, some soldiers would be on guard and some would be sleeping. So you don't have all your soldiers staying up all night. And so you see a big bed in there. Soldiers would typically be sleeping in their uniforms while in this guard room, so at any time they could be called up, ready to go out and serve.
Dedicated to the memory of the gallant band of patriots. The cannon and howitzer at Fort Ticonderoga.
So this is where we construct all the clothing and uniforms that you see all of our staff wearing here today.
Okay.
So right now I've got a little sewing lesson going on.
So you're here every day?
Yep, about 5 days a week, but yeah.
Really?
Yep. Oops. Yeah, so we have to clothe all of our staff, so it's kind of a continuous process, especially since we change our portrayal year every year. So like right now it's 1774 for us, which means we're all British. But next year we'll be portraying 1759, so it'll all be French, which means we have new clothing to make. Yep. In the period. So in the period, all the uniforms are going to be made in England.
Okay.
America didn't have a big textile industry just yet, really small. So England, even to this day, our wool is coming from England. But at the time, the wool is being produced there, but then the uniforms are being made by civilian tailors or contracted by the military. But they're being made in like a large, medium, small. So they're then shipped here as full uniforms, sometimes in cloth and tailoring tools. Often like the waistcoat and breeches might be made here. But the coats themselves are coming already made. And then because tailoring was the most common trade that a man could be employed in the 18th century, and many soldiers are coming from a working class background. And in the 18th century, working class means trades. So a lot of tailors, carpenters, shoemakers, blacksmiths, things like that. And the military wants to use those skills that they already have. So they need people who know how to do this stuff too. So when those uniforms are coming here from England in that large, medium, small, there are tailors who are also soldiers. So they're like, kind of like two jobs. They're working as soldiers, but also tailors. They're taking the uniforms and doing all those alterations to make them fit the individual soldiers. Material, it's woven woolen that goes through a process called fulling, which is very similar to felting. But whereas felting is using the wool that hasn't been spun and woven into fabric yet, this is already fabric. And then it goes through that heating, pressing process to create that almost like a felted wool.
Going inside the artillery. Pay a visit to a soldier inside where he's making shoes.
You're going to last your uppers and form your uppers around the shoe itself. Then you're going to stitch the welt to the uppers to the insole. Once you do that, you're going to what's called brace the ran, which is the back, basically back of the shoe. There's a piece that gets folded over. Once you do that, you put a piece of instep weathering or shank weathering. Once that is in, you can then put your sole on, but you're not done yet. You trim the sole. After the sole is on, you start to stitch your heels. You stitch the first layer of the heel called a split lift on to basically make it so it sits flat and not at an angle. Then once that's done, you come back and you begin to put the rest of your heels on. Using wooden pegs, and then now the current step is you let it dry until it's fully dry. Once it's fully dry, you come in and you're going to blacken the edges, which is what I'm waiting on now for it to dry.
Oh,